Yeah, welcome online and in person to this Cambridge Festival event about women, climate change and fieldwork. What we'll do is we'll introduce ourselves and our online convener as well. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping and then I'm going to hand over to Afifa and Shirashi to take us forward. So my name's Rebecca Roberts. I work at the MacDonald Institute for Archaeological Research, where I'm the project coordinator for the Mapping Archaeological Heritage in South Asia project. Together with Afifa, with Shirashi, who you'll meet, and some other brilliant women in Cambridge, we founded the South Asia Women in the Field Network at the end of last year, aiming to bring together women who work in fieldwork in South Asia. But Afifa's going to talk a bit more about that. So over to you, Afifa. Oh, we've got some housekeeping. So you'll see in the chat that we are recording. So if you don't want to be recorded, you can turn off your camera and your microphone. If you have any questions, the best thing is to put them in the chat, but if you're here, you can put your hand up. Yes, the Zoom recording will be available after the talk. So on I think on YouTube, isn't it, the Cambridge Festival YouTube channel? So you can catch the recording afterwards. So, yeah.
All right. So as Rebecca said, we're part of South Asia Women in the Field network. It basically is what it says on the tin, really. We were a group of women who got together from different disciplines. So Rebecca and I are from like an archaeological discipline. We have Maria, who is from environmental sciences. We've had GIS specialist. We also have Shirashi, who will be convening online, who's from a geography and development studies background. And we all had a similar issue in the fact that getting into fieldwork was always a lot harder for us, even though, you know, a lot of us were very passionate about it. And that led to a number of barriers for other work that would lead on from fieldwork and barriers in our careers. And so we wanted to get women together, and this is particularly from a South Asian perspective and background, to talk about these issues and see what we could do and look at some practical actions that we could take. So we're based in the CRASSH kind of network, so the interdisciplinary networks at Cambridge University, which is why a lot of us are based here and talking about issues from our perspective, but also talking to people in like Indian and Pakistani institutions as well, and Bangladesh and the South Asia kind of region. So we were talking about things like risk and risks that are specific to South Asian women and women working in South Asia, all the different issues that come with positionality and identity, family, you know, how can we bring our family into fieldwork, or balancing needs with family that I think women have a unique position of having, balancing careers and our culture, and working with different languages, all of these issues that we've been coming across during the network. So yeah, this is just what we have done so far. We've had a number of speaker sessions talking on these issues. We've also had some of our team members also going into the field. There's Kawili in India working with some of our collaborators. And then also people telling us their amazing stories. So we have the first maritime archaeologist in Pakistan and real trailblazers in archaeology and development studies. And today we'll be having another kind of roundtable discussion. So you can see after our sessions, we get together, have coffee, and just talk for an hour. And these discussions we felt like could go on for ages and ages. An hour was never enough. We only have 1 hour for both the talks from our speakers and for discussion, but we hope that we can continue on these discussions later on as well. So we'll just quickly introduce ourselves. My name is Aisha Khan. I'm one of the research assistants at the master project. I have like a commercial archaeology, so construction background, coming into research from that angle has been interesting, and I hope to do a lot more fieldwork in Pakistan specifically, and that's what my role is at the moment. So Shreyashi, on to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shreyashi Gupta, and I am one of the co-conveners of this network with Rebecca and Afifa and everyone in the team. And broadly, my research focuses on urban infrastructure and housing in Dhaka and Mumbai, which is where I have also done my fieldwork, and I continue to engage with the fields. So yeah, without taking more time, I'm really looking forward to engaging with you all in this conversation.
Thank you. So I won't talk about, I won't go on too long, but just quickly today we're focusing on climate and the women involved in researching climate change in South Asia and working on the field, working with women in those countries as well. We have Aisha Khan today, who is a climate change activist and the CEO of the Mountain and Glacier Protection Organization, who has written about all of these issues, worked with women in the local communities, and has first-hand experience in the roles that women can and need to play to combat destructive impacts of climate change. So she's going to talk about her work in more detail and much better than I can at the moment. So I would pass on to her.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Delighted to be here. My name is Aisha Khan. I'm from Pakistan, and I've been working in this development space for the last 22 years. And it has been a journey of constant evolution for me. The mountains and mountain communities have been my teacher, and I think I've learned a lot from both during my interactions over the years. The Karakoram mountain range in Pakistan, where the focus of my work is particularly fascinating. It has the largest and the densest collection of mountains outside and the glaciers outside the polar regions, and it has 4 mountain peaks that are above 8,000 meters. In fact, it also houses Mount K2, which is the second highest mountain in the world. And it was a trek to the base camp of this mountain, actually, which launched me into my own career of conservation and working closely with mountain communities. Generally, when people go to these mountain areas, they're looking for adventure or they're looking for recreation. And the impressions that they have are limited to this experience. Most actually don't understand the dynamics of mountain communities, how they interact with their own environment, and the daily challenges that they face. My own immersion experience, largely due to the work that I do on the field over there, has given me this ability to understand mountain communities, the socioeconomic conditions in which they live, and how over the last 2 decades, I have seen climate change impact their lives. But before I talk more about mountains and hardships and constraints, let me just say that going back to this region over and over again in the last 20 years, the mountain landscape has never ceased to amaze me. And the resilience of the mountain communities is what actually keeps me engaged and fascinated with the coping capacities that they have. These communities live on the fringes and are in the first line of climate change hazards. They have limited means and very little access to resources, and yet they cope with remarkable resilience. And their resolve is so resolute that it actually leaves me feeling quite overwhelmed. Typically, these communities live in very remotely located areas. They have poor infrastructure, they have limited means of income, they don't have means for income diversification, and most rely on agriculture and livestock for their sustenance. Now, what's happening in this region is that climate is changing the patterns of hydrology, and this is having a direct impact on their lives. In agriculture, these communities rely on snow and glacial melt for their irrigation water needs. Now they're not getting water in the right quantity or in the right time. And what is happening as a result is food scarcity. They cannot grow crops that they typically grow at the right time. And for their own survival, male members are now leaving villages in large numbers, which is like out migration, leaving these women who are not equipped to cope with these challenges to take on this extra responsibility. Lack of municipal services also makes community rely on the same snow and glacial melt for domestic use of water, especially for drinking water. What happens is contamination, gastrointestinal diseases, waterborne diseases, and frequent sicknesses, which affects productivity, but also erodes the meager savings that they have on medical expenses. The girl child particularly suffers because she's pulled out of school to look after sick people at home and also to provide help in water collection responsibilities. The third and the most deadly impact of these erratic water flows is flooding, riverine flooding, flash flooding, and mudslides. These climate-induced disasters destroy entire villages, and they kill people, and they take away the limited assets that these people have. So therefore, the focus of the work that we do is to strengthen the adaptive resilience of these communities, because we realize that climate is changing. It is not happening due to anything which these communities are doing, but they have to bear the brunt. So we deliver need-based and demand-driven projects that take into account the priority needs of the community. The community prioritizes what they want, and we help them to develop and deliver these projects through them. And most of what they ask for is irrigation schemes, safe drinking water schemes, and flood protection walls. So throughout the process, the community remains at the center of all the interventions. We mobilize and organize communities, and we develop an institutional platform. So they have a decision-making platform, and we get them to elect their own people. So they have their own representatives, so they can develop local stewardship as well. We build their capacities through a series of training workshops. And we also ensure that there's 40% inclusion of women as representatives. So women have their voices as part of decision-making development partners. And the inclusion of women also brings a gender perspective to the interventions, which adds to their value. We have found that this approach of co-creating policies and including transparency and accountability as one of the operational requirements built into the design has worked very well for us. It has also earned us the trust of the community, and that makes it easier for us now to go in and get the buy-in that we need for their collaboration. So far, over the years, we have delivered 321 projects that have replenished 92.7 billion liters of water back to nature and community. Women who bear the brunt with an overload of work share have more free time now, and our projects have contributed to their physical well-being as well as to their emotional well-being. The villages where we have worked and provided irrigation schemes have been able to bring barren land under cultivation, which ensures their food security, and it has improved their other socioeconomic indicators as well. In areas where we have delivered drinking water schemes, we notice a sudden improvement in the girl child's attendance and also in her learning outcomes. Flood protection walls, of course, have saved lives, livelihoods, and stopped soil erosion. So together, these interventions have made a transformative impact in the lives of the communities that we serve. And this, of course, is a source of immense satisfaction for me and for my team. There's a lot of work that still remains to be done, but we need collaboration with donors to have access to finance, because if you notice, most of the work that we do, irrigation schemes, water supply, flood protection, this is infrastructure related work that requires funding. So we also have to look for donors who can provide us with funds to do this work. These are high risk communities, and therefore they deserve high priority consideration. I just want to say that, having worked in this area for so long, what I notice is that mountain ecology is very fragile and it is also very sensitive to change. And when changes take place in cryospheric spaces, they do not remain limited to that area. It has a ripple effect that has an impact on downstream communities, and it also disrupts the global climate change regime. There's a lot more that can be said about the disconnect between climate science and communities, but I'm going to come back to that later during the interactive session. For now, I just want to say that mountain communities do not really exploit mountain resources or degrade the environment. They only use the resources to meet their basic needs. So when we talk about resilience, I think we have to look for ways that can balance community needs with natural preservation, conservation in ways that allows both of them to thrive in tandem. And that is what we strive through our work, to bring about this harmonization in which we allow both to move forward in a sustainable way. So that's all for now from me. Thank you.
Thank you, that was brilliant. If you're interested in more of Aisha's work, I really urge you to listen to some of her YouTube videos and also the work that the MGPO do. It's amazing. Quickly now, we'll just go to Adeeba and Gemma, and then we'll open up for discussion. So Adeeba is an environmental researcher with a specific focus on climate change, environmental policies, and sustainable development. She's worked at institutions like BRAC in Dhaka, and she's been working in the development sector of Bangladesh for over 3 years in qualitative research and analysis, and is interested in researching the varied impacts of climate change and gender and environment. So perfect for our session today. Over to you, Adeeba.
Thank you so much, Afifa. Thank you for having me on. It's good to be on a brilliant session like this, especially as a woman, and especially during this month as well. I am Adeeba. I work in Bangladesh in the environmental and development sector. My research primarily focus. If we could just go to the next slide, I think I have some nice pictures there. Yeah. I wanted to talk a bit about the research that I do and the work that I've been doing here for the past few years. Essentially, what I focus on is the adaptation or the ways in which people adapt to climate change and the adverse effects of climate change. So what I've been studying is how there are several regions across Bangladesh that are particularly vulnerable to climate change. Bangladesh ranked as the 7th most vulnerable country in the world to climate change as well. So it's important to understand how the people who are actually living in those areas interact with the environment and how they have adapted to these impacts that they face on a daily basis in their lives. And some of my work involved understanding the perceptions of these people as well, because there are a lot of information that's out there, a lot of data and papers that will tell you about all the different impacts and ways in which people are to be affected. But what I was interested in understanding, what are the people saying on the ground? What are they saying? What are they reporting as some of the problems that they face in these regions as well? One of the interesting things that I look into is the ways in which people adapt as well. And I've got a brilliant photo here on the right that shows how people have started growing vegetables in their gardens. And this is in particular to kind of combat the fact that there's saline soil, so they cannot grow any of their vegetables there. So they take it upon themselves to fend for themselves, basically. So I looked into some of the adaptation technologies and local methods in which people adapt to climate change in Bangladesh. I also look into climate migration, what are the reasons why people move from these vulnerable regions? What are some of the ways in which this movement, which is an adaptation method, can be better supported, because there are factors like xenophobia and mental trauma and many other things that affect these climate migrants as well. So what I try to do here is gauge out ways in which this can be made better, and this could be through things like managed retreats and building migrant-friendly towns so that those towns are well equipped to take in and absorb these climate migrants during environmental or climate-induced hazards. So, and the last thing that I look into is basically the difference between the policy reports and the reported data that's available through the national reports or the IPCC data or any other official data, and what, once again, it's connected to the first point as well, what people on the ground are reporting. So when a national report says, okay, this is the particular effect that this region is supposed to feel, what about the people who are living in that region? What are they saying? How are they kind of connecting to these? Is there a dichotomy between these two datas? So, and one of the brilliant parts about working in this sector is you get to meet wonderful, amazing individuals. I have some photos of these brilliant women I've met during my work, whose daily lives are affected during different adverse impacts of climate change as well. And we have impacts like women have struggled to go to school, so it affects their education, it affects agriculture and domestic work. And this kind of brings us into the main point of my presentation today, which is the comic that we wrote. If you could just go to the next slide, please. So based on some of the findings of these people that we have met during our research in different regions of the world, we decided to write a comic. And the best part about the comic is probably the fact that it's brought to life by a team of 4 women. So Gemma, Gina, myself, and our wonderful illustrator, Kat. So this was based on our primary research. So it's not very sciencey per se. It's not about, there are many different words that are associated with climate change, like, precipitation and sea level rise, etc. What we essentially wanted to do is kind of give life to how daily lives, how ordinary lives, and just low income families and across the world, how people are experiencing climate change and how they have kind of changed their lifestyles or have had to adapt to different things, which is something that we try to reflect in this comic. So it spans across 5 different countries, 5 stories of people from 5 regions of Bangladesh, Bolivia, South Africa, Puerto Rico, and Barbuda. So for example, in Bangladesh, we talked about how the sea level rise affects the domestic work of women on a regular basis. In South Africa, we spoke about how the apartheid history kind of had an impact on the drought, or how the drought has affected people in South Africa differently based on their race. In Bolivia, we spoke about, or the stories essentially talk how people, because of climate change, they've had to migrate as an adaptation tool again. But this migration has caused separation of families and strains in their relationships. And in Barbuda, we talked about how disaster capitalists are, taking advantage of the situation after Hurricane Irma. And as well as in Puerto Rico, we talked about how after the Hurricane Maria, there was a severe threat to food security. So this comic essentially looks into the daily lives, as I mentioned, and the brilliant part about it is that it's very relatable. It doesn't paint these people in a victimized manner, which is something that we often see in general media, how it's kind of patronized almost. The way these poor people or vulnerable people are seen. What we wanted to do is give them a bit more character and kind of bring them to life, and on a scale where everyone can understand that, okay, this is just yet another person just like myself, and we could relate to them. We can probably even have a laugh out of it. And that's why we chose this method of, using a comic to kind of translate our research onto a form where people can easily understand. There are obviously quite a lot of benefits to transforming research into this method, and Gemma will further discuss on how this has worked and everything. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Adeeba. So that's leading very nicely to Gemma. Gemma Sou is a lecturer in environment and disasters at the University of Manchester. She's a development geographer who has creatively translated her research in ways that have international impact on public understanding of disasters. So she's interested in how popular media, such as graphic novels, as we can see, can be used to talk about these difficult and multi-plural issues. So that's working on everyday stories of climate change, which Adeeba has been talking about, and also after Maria. Gemma, on to you.
Sorry, you should be able to share now.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. So, where are we? There you go. I have to ask again, even after 3 years of using Zoom, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, super. Thank you so much. I'm really really excited to be part of the discussion today. And just to say, it's a bit of a caveat, I don't specifically work on South Asia, but through working with Adeeba, I've been really fortunate to learn more about the impacts of climate change in South Asia. And yeah, that was one of the main stories that we brought into the comic. So what I'm going to talk about for the next 5 or 10 minutes is the benefits, or why I think it's really exciting to possibly translate your research on climate change into comics, and how the everyday impacts of climate change, particularly on women, they translate really well into comics. So there'll be some images from the research that Adeeba did that we turn into the comic, and there'll be a couple of images from a different, like from Bolivia, for example. But you can see here from the front cover that it's based around women's experiences, Bangladesh, Puerto Rico, Barbuda, Bolivia, and South Africa. And that focus on women is a symptom of the fact that our research was at the domestic level, at the household level. So it's often women that we were interacting with through that methodology. And through that, a lot of the stories are around the domestic space, around the household, around the community level. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I think are really exciting reasons for communicating research into comics. So one of the things that you're doing when you're translating your research into comics is you're trying to create these convincing worlds of lived experience from below, because the culture of comics is often first person perspective. You know, there's a protagonist, and you're navigating their everyday life from this very personalized human experience. And because of the fact that you're trying to create these convincing worlds, you have to start tuning into different elements of research sites that maybe you'd never thought of. Because the illustrators, for example, that Adeeba and I were working with, they would say, you know, what does it sound like? What does it smell like? What are the different tastes? What do people wear? What are the materials of the houses? You know, what time of day do people wake up at? You know, what does the food look like? What's the ambience and the emotions of the area? So all of that thick description is the information that you'll need to create what we might call convincing worlds from below. And in doing that, you get to this opportunity to create more complex ideas of what people's lives and environments look like, which you often don't get, you're not able to talk about in academic articles. So you're creating this more, nuanced representation of people affected by climate change. Another really exciting thing, which is taken from the story in Bolivia, is that you can transport readers to moments and places and experiences that you often don't get to hear about in mainstream media, or which you can't represent if you're using audiovisual methods like photography or videos. So for example, here, this is a conversation between a Bolivian mother who migrated to Spain to earn more money, to send back remittances, to invest in more resilient housing. And this is all about, like Adeeba was saying, this tension between estrangement between family members. These aren't the things that often you'll get to capture visually, but maybe your participants talk about these hidden experiences of climate change. So you can visualize them later on through illustration. So you can get to, again, give these nuanced representations of what everyday life is like with climate change that we just often don't hear about in mainstream media. Another really exciting thing is that you can represent people's past histories, their lived experiences with climate change, but also you can visualize the speculative visions or the aspirations or the hopes and dreams. So the temporality of comics is really, really complex. You don't have to stick to linear time. You get to disrupt it and show that people have these past histories of living with climate change, but they also have these hopes and dreams of what life could be like. So it really speaks this idea of, geographies of hope or possible alternative futures with climate change. And again, just showing people that they have agency to aspire or ideas about what life could be like with climate change. And you could bring in these ideas about what adaptation or mitigation could look like. So just quickly run through a couple of ideas about creating comics. Is that when we were doing this, Adeeba, Gina, Kat and I, we created fictionalized characters because of anonymity. So these people here, they're not real people, but their stories are an amalgamation of the main research findings. So you see Rahima there is the character from Bangladesh. She is the amalgamation of Adeeba's main research findings that we thought were really important to tell in the story. So it's not one individual story, it's kind of bringing together main research findings, like as you would in an academic journal article, for example. And you're not trying to tell the objective truth of people's stories. You're assembling different social formations, different lived experiences, different perceptions to create a story, not the story. So they are subjective in this way. And when we were thinking about what to communicate, we had in mind, who is the audience? We wanted to speak to high school students in particular, but comics cut across all different ages, education, backgrounds. But the main thing we wanted to do was bring in the main research findings that we thought were interesting to talk about, but also to challenge this idea of paralysis and vulnerability and this infantilization of people affected by climate change, to show, as Aisha and Adeeba said, that people have agency, ideas about how to adapt. They're not spectacular, but nevertheless, they are strategies to adapt and show agency, which is something that is threaded through all the stories. Tiny little bit about writing the script. So in the story based around Bangladesh, Adeeba and I would sit down together. Adeeba would explain her research, and then we'd write out the script. And the idea is, if you've read a lot of comics, you can kind of visualize how the storytelling technology of comics, the temporality that you pick the space on a page in a certain way. So that can really be helpful. If you have an idea of what it looks like, you can have a really, dense script. But if you don't, you're not very comfortable with, creating the images in particular, you can give the story to the illustrator and they can run wild. And often that's amazing because they have more visual storytelling expertise. And this is just a photo Adeeba showed before, that we gave to illustrators so they have an idea of what it looks like, and we'd give lots of images to the illustrator. And just this is an example, like this one panel that's how much kind of information you can provide. It's like, what's happening, who's there, what are they wearing, what time of day is it, what is the emotion, any little nuances like the roti in the man's hand and the dog's trying to get it, the colors, all of that is what the illustrator relies on, which allows you to create these sorts of images. So it really lends itself to research where you have a really good understanding of that context. And finally, just quickly to say that if you're interested in communicating your research as a comic, it's really great to partner with an organization. We did this with Geography Teachers Association, who distributed these as packs of 30 to geography teachers across Australia and the UK. But we've also got online versions which have been translated into different languages. And that's been amazing, because we now know that the comic's been used for teaching in over 25 countries. And so there actually is a real appetite for this. So just to end there, I'd really, really encourage you to think about comics as a way to communicate research, because you're not dumbing it down. You're not stripping away like your research findings. You're just communicating them in a different way, which can be a lot more accessible, I would say. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Oh, and there's a paper that just came out today about the idea of translating research into comics. So thank you so much.
Brilliant, thank you. I really enjoyed reading the comic, both that and After Maria. As you said, they put across these stories and wasn't giving you a lot of exposition. It really got you into the story, and there were so many details in there that I could really recognize for issues in Pakistan and other places. So as you can see, we've got three very different speakers, but I think they're both combined, all three are combined in the fact that not only are they women working in climate change research, but they also work in bringing that research to other people. So you have Aisha, who's bringing it to policymakers and international communities, and you have Gemma and Adeeba also working to bring it to school level children and educating the general public and translating those ideas. So we can open up to questions and to some discussion. Also, Shreyashi, maybe you want to chime in here with some of the general kind of questions that we came up to kind of lead the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. This was such a fascinating conversation to be a part of. So my question is actually based on what you spoke, and I was thinking, how do we translate fieldwork into something that affects policy, or reaching out to this wider audience, as we all are in academic settings doing our research. And like Gemma, you were pointing out, we write articles for journals and stuff, but how do we deal with or co-create these resources with communities? So for Aisha, the question is, you were highlighting the disconnect between climate science and communities, and you said you'll come back to it. So it'll be nice to hear how do you go back to the communities with these training materials or the policy stuff that you have worked on from your programs. And for Gemma and Adeeba, the question would be, what sort of responses did you get on the comics from these communities? Did you had a chance to go back there and present these? It'll be great to hear from you all.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, if you want to, thanks.
Okay, I think it was fascinating listening to Adeeba and to Gemma and how they are actually bringing science to communities through this medium. We haven't been able to do that, but what we do is we have group sessions with the community, and we understand the science of climate change, but it's too technical. So what we do is to get them to talk about their own past, how their parents lived, what were the resources around them like then, what was the landscape like, what were the timings and patterns of hydrology, and what are the changes that they are witnessing, how the sizes of the family have increased, how they are now demanding more from their natural environment. And then we connect the two to make them see that, the way they deal with the environment makes the difference. And that is why the emphasis in our trainings is to simplify science science and make it more relatable to them, so that they can actually understand that they rely on these ecological goods and services. So if they overexploit them, then they are actually compromising their own future and that of their own children's future. So what we do is to try and link ecology with economy, because then it makes sense for them. You have to understand that they have to live off these resources, but they have to learn how to do it in a sustainable manner. And because they live close to nature, I think they have already a very good understanding of how brutal nature can be if you don't live in the right rhythm with nature. So it becomes easier for us now, because let's say 20 years ago, when I was talking to them about this, I didn't get much traction because they could not actually see the real-time climate change happening to them. But now in the last 10 years, I noticed that the patterns of hydrology have changed drastically. And now they can actually see that it's affecting them. So they can't explain it to why this is happening, but when we tell them why it's happening in the global context in a very simplified way, they understand and they resonate and they collaborate and respond in a much better way. And then, you know, they also see that we are bringing their voices, the voices of mountain communities, to policy level and making mountain ecology and conservation an important part of adaptive resilience. So I think then it gets you a much better buy-in from both sides.
Brilliant, thank you. Gemma, Adeeba, do you want to chime in on your side?
Yeah, I can quickly answer that, then Adeeba can talk about Bangladesh. So the comics have been posted back to Puerto Rico, and yeah, the people that I was working with, they were given packs of the comics, and the response was great. I mean, in the first comic that I did, which is specifically around after Puerto Rico, we wrote it together, and it was amazing, like how the feedback on creating the script was so amazing, in the sense that people felt a lot more invested and comfortable giving feedback on the script when they could see themselves rather than it being text. So we'd have little draft images of the house, of the street, of their pets, you know, with dialogue, and people felt, you know, a lot more comfortable giving feedback on that than obviously, you know, some theoretical paper. So that really increased the participatory nature of the process. And they've been posted to like a lot of schools in Puerto Rico. In Barbuda, the comic, it was posted last week. Like there were 300 that were posted last week. So I'll let you know what people think about that. For South Africa, Gina has told me that she's just about to print the comic to be handed out to people that she's working with around Cape Town. So I don't really know yet, but we're in the process of distributing to the communities, but right now it's online, and the packs have been sent out to high schools. But so far it's been, you know, really positive feedback. As for Bolivia, I haven't been able to give it to the families, because in all honesty, it was over 10 years ago that I did research, and I've lost touch with the families. But yeah, anyway, I'll pass over to Adeeba.
Thanks, Gemma. So over here in Bangladesh, it's similar to the situation that Gemma mentioned before. We haven't been able to distribute it to the communities yet, but I have talked to some of the academics and some of the networks in which we've distributed the online version as well. And honestly, I think I'd like to talk more about how it affected academics and scientists, because this is not a very, as we mentioned before as well, that this is not a method that you as a researcher you would consider reflecting your research on. So it is kind of interesting for people who are working in this field or any other research fields to think that, oh, okay, so your research, kind of, you took stories out of your research and used it here. Okay. And they have that thing, okay, yeah, we can probably do the same thing as well. And when I talk to some of the groundwork people, when I've mentioned this comic as well, people who are living in some of these regions, they were very interested as well. Now, we haven't been able to translate it to Bangla yet. So once we get to do that, we would hopefully get to spread this across some of the schools, and especially because these are targeted towards school children, it would be an educational tool as well. So yeah, so the response has been so far very positive, very encouraging, and it kind of drives you to do more of this kind of work. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have more questions from the room, Afifa?
There are lots of questions. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentations and so much to think about. I have lots of questions from lots of different angles. I'd like to start by focusing on the research work itself. So what are the main challenges that perhaps being women you might have faced in, especially reaching these very remote areas where there are often security concerns as well, lack of safe commute transport facilities as well. So practically speaking, how do you go about doing this kind of research? What kind of resources, what kind of mechanisms you need to have in place to be able to do this kind of research? That's the first question. I think I'll start with that and then I'll move
on. Should I respond to that?
Oh, yeah, please.
Well, we've been working for over 2 decades in the mountain regions. Yes, the infrastructure is bad. The road access is not very good. But working there as a woman, I've never felt that there is a security issue. The environment is very safe and the people are very welcoming. And I think that is one reason why I, as a woman, have been able to work in this area without any perception of threat. Now, how we access women is a little different now from when we first started working there. Because when you first go in, there is a certain level of suspicion about your intent, how you may change the social context of the society in which these communities live. But after the first 5 years, when they actually saw what we were doing, how we were doing it, the methodology of inclusion, and giving them actually stewardship rights, because when you have transparency, when we get donor funding to implement projects, we get the community to open a bank account and we put that money in their name. We just have, a third-party signatory to oversee technical works and to maintain quality assurance. The rest, we train them in managing that project, and we encourage them to employ women so that they can also receive wages. So when households are receiving income from works that are being done in their village to strengthen their resilience, and they feel that, yes, they can trust you, there's transparency, and you don't have any other motive but to help them, they start collaborating. So now, after 20 years, we've reached a point where we have, I think, over 500 applications from different villages. And the interesting part is that now communities send their women delegations to us, because they understand that, the women have now got social capital with us. So it has given them a sense of self-worth as well. And we can see that in the demeanor of the women, that they may not have full participatory rights in decision-making, but at least now they've begun to feel that they matter, that it's they whose voices make the difference on behalf of the community. So that for us is a big step forward. And as for women being vocal about their demands, I cannot stop their chatter when I speak with them alone, because their hopes and aspirations are just overwhelming. They are fascinated with what you tell them. And the younger lot, I have a lot of hope from the younger lot, because they do not want to grow up like their parents. They want to be able to do something for their community. They don't want to be seen as women when you talk about them as vulnerable. They feel they're as strong, as able, as capable. And if they're just empowered enough and given that space in society, that they would like to play their due share and role. So all that is very encouraging. And working in these very, very remote villages, one has to be mindful about the fact that change is a very slow process in these very, very conservative societies. So we've covered a lot of ground. And I think now with social media, with other forms of interaction and communication, one will be able to make that quantum leap forward for the next generation. So that's how it really works for us.
I think if I may add to that, my experience was quite relatively different from what Aisha just mentioned. I did face a lot of struggles or constraints in terms of researching because, as the question was, especially in the South Asian region, there are many caveats to take into consideration. There are conservative people who are not so much willing to speak, but there are also advantages to being a woman in this field as well, because women in these remote areas are more likely to open up to another woman instead of another man. And therefore, we can gauge out some of the very interesting nuances of their lives, which is definitely an advantage. And in terms of practical solutions, when you're trying to overcome some obstacle as a female researcher, I'd say one of the biggest things that worked in my favor was the institutional supports. So if I would go in on my own, it would not be very well received. But if I went in with a few other colleagues around me as well, and if we came in when we declare that, okay, we're from this organization and here's what our intent is and here's what we hope to achieve, they're more likely to open up and take into consideration what you have to say. And also it's easier to gauge out or understand what we are trying to find out from women and many other ways and many other areas that we're researching on.
And Adeeba, if you could just add to that, what kind of organizations would work in this context? Are there any specific ones that you would recommend? So for example, NGOs or whether educational institutes would be a better approach to do this kind of thing?
NGOs are essentially more likely to help you out because again, in the South Asian region, there's a widespread number of NGOs who work in remote areas. So what happens is those people who are in those regions, they know these NGOs. So if you are working with these NGOs, let's say NGO X, and you come in and you say, I work with X and I would like to hear about your experience, they have that trust factor that, okay, she's a legitimate person. She's not here to scam me, or she's not gonna. And then there's another aspect as well, because there's a lot of funds and aids coming in. Some of these people do assume that you are here to, if they give you the right kind of information, they might get some benefit out of it, financial or otherwise. So it's important to be clear on that, but having that NGO support kind of gives you legitimacy on what you're trying to find out as well.
Okay, this is only an hour session, which is quite sad because I feel like this discussion should go on for a long time afterwards as well. So we have maybe time for one more question if anyone has anything online. No?
Can I ask one? I was really struck by, I mean, you highlighted it, Gemma, in your talk as well, but struck in the comic about, identifying, recognizing the agency of these women, that they're not victims, but also that balance between, identifying agency, but also highlighting the need for more government support and things. So I suppose it's a question to all three of you, really. I mean, how do you manage that? How do you get that balance right between highlighting people's individual agency, but also kind of calling for more government, international or whatever is needed aid-wise, or initiatives from sort of at a government level, and how do you find that balance between what you're seeing in the field versus when you get to talk to policymakers?
Yeah, happy to jump in on that. That's a really, really good question, because it's something that we did think about, how to balance that, because this idea of romanticizing agency, and people are so have the initiative and ingenuity to adapt, but it just strips the state of responsibility for supporting people. In the comic, we probably made it quite explicit in terms of, yeah, people are doing all these different adaptive practices, but they were frustrated with it. And even some of the stories, they explicitly said, where is the government? Why isn't the local government stepping in? The mayor has not supported us. The government of Antigua is trying to force us to migrate off the island. So that in the dialogue, it was quite explicit. So that's the way that we did it in the comic. And I remember when we did the first iterations of the front cover, and it was like the five characters were like sort of smiling. And we thought, no, it's a trope. It's a trope of these happy people in climate change being like, that whole essentialist idea of people are just happy with the bare minimum. And we were like, no, get rid of that. They need to have more muted facial expressions. So that was something we were very conscious of and tried to bring through in like the images and the dialogue.
Aisha, I wonder about your experience, that sort of from community to policy, how you find that?
I find that one of the roles when we go in as a not-for-profit organization to work closely with the communities is to keep very close links with policymakers and local actors who are in the field over there in that area. So before we start a project, we first go to the government agency that is responsible and explain it to them, take them on board, and then we bring the communities in and we all sit in the same room so everybody's on the same page. So what we try to do is to increase the level of trust between the community and the government. And right now we're in that fortunate position where government recognizes that it does not have the ability to cope with such a huge challenge. So it is actually soliciting support to work with an all of government, all of society approach, and we become the interlocutors. So we take great care to take the government agencies with us for inaugural events, for closing ceremonies, for getting them to give, the speeches that need to be made at such events, so that they feel a part of it and don't feel that their role is being usurped. And at the same time, we make them see how we do things and why community gives us a better buy-in. It is because of co-creation in policies, and we encourage them then to bring communities on board. And instead of sitting and making policies top down, they should work with the grassroots communities and prioritize their needs and focus on their demands and work more closely with them. So because now communities have become more vocal also in their expression of displeasure, the governments don't want agitations or complaints against them either. So there is a much more healthier loop, I find now, than 10 years ago in the working of how community, government, civil societies are coming together to work as one entity working for the same cause, but playing different roles.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We have come to the end of the hour time. Like I said, it's kind of sad. Maybe we should have planned for 2 hours instead of 1, or maybe an hour and a half. But what can you do? This is just a bite-sized, I suppose, session on a whole multitude of issues that could possibly come out of it. Hopefully, we can maybe organize something similar in the future so we can expand on some of those issues. But thank you so much to Aisha, Adeeba and Gemma for agreeing to speak for us and with us and talk about their amazing work. We'll definitely be following what you'll be doing in the future, and hopefully, yes, we can do something similar again so we can expand on some of these issues. The recording will be on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, CRASSH.
On the CRASSH YouTube channel, so that if anyone wants to leave any questions or comments, maybe we can talk about some of the issues a bit more then. But yes, you can follow Aisha on Twitter and also see some of the amazing kind of talks that she's given on YouTube and writing for Dawn newspaper. You can also read Gemma and Adeeba's comic online. It's free and it's really easy to access. I think we put the link up on our Twitter as well, so you can read it for yourselves. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll hope to see some of you again soon in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.